Hello, everyone, and welcome. I'm Tatyana Cerullo. I'm an attorney of 25 years, and the last 17 years I've been practicing Marshall Islands law in their maritime and corporate laws. And in the last 3 years or so, I've been focusing mostly on DAOs. I help DAOs register in the Marshall Islands as a limited liability company. And I had the privilege to play a key role in the amendments to the DAO Act in the Marshall Islands and the regulations. I'm delighted to moderate this panel on crypto policy, public interest, and participatory regulation. I would love to introduce, this is Iris Ikeda, the former Commissioner of Financial Institutions for the state of Hawaii. And please welcome Reba Beeson, who is the General Counsel of Alphapoint, it's a digital software company, technology company. And Alphapoint is also the issuer of the Chiva, is that how you pronounce it? Chiva wallet in El Salvador. And Tamara, Tamara Szulc, she is the community lead for Stand With Crypto. That was that commercial we just saw. And that is the largest grassroots advocacy group in the United States. I'd like to invite each of you to introduce yourselves. Take a minute or two.
Okay, so I guess I'll start. So again, my name is Iris Ikeda. I'm the former bank regulator. It has a really long title, but nobody calls me that. They call me the bank commissioner. And I had been doing that for 11 years before I retired. And part of what I did as the bank commissioner was really do a lot of research. And one of the research things that I've done was form a sandbox. The only one in the country that was formed without the legislature. I did it with the powers that the bank laws and money transmitter laws gave me. And we ran that for 4 years. I think it was pretty successful. And I'll talk about a little bit more about that. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Reba Beeson, and I'm General Counsel of Alphapoint. And thank you, Tatyana, for your introduction. At Alphapoint, we build digital asset platforms that power exchanges, payment systems, and trading systems on a global basis. And so, as Tatyana mentioned, we power the Chiva wallet for the government of El Salvador. And El Salvador was the first country in the world to legislate Bitcoin as fiat currency. So alongside of the US dollar as its fiat currency, it also recognizes Bitcoin as such. And in addition to that, we've powered the exchanges for some of the largest banks in the world, including Bancolombia, which is the largest bank in Colombia, and some of the banks in the Southeast Asian region, as well as Index, which is the largest crypto exchange in Canada. I have a Wall Street background, so I started my career as a tax lawyer for some of the big law firms in New York, and then I transitioned to the capital markets side. I was the head of the complex financing group for BNP Paribas. So through all of that, through all the decades, I've been involved in creating and helping Wall Street firms create new products and services. And so this is a very exciting world for me to be helping to create new products and services around crypto, digital assets, and the infrastructure to support that. And thank you so much, Ellen, for having me and all of us here today. Ellen is such a what would you call it, expert in her own right, but also one of the best networkers I've ever met. So thank you.
Hi, I'm Tamara Szulc. I also come from a legal background, but I got ignited by the energy of crypto communities. So I joined Stand With Crypto. I'm the community coordinator at Stand With Crypto. Stand With Crypto is the largest American crypto advocacy group. We advocate for the 52 million crypto owners in the United States. We fight for pro-crypto policy, and a part of my responsibility at Stand With Crypto is to work with state chapter programs. Currently, we have 40 state chapters, and Ellen is one of our wonderful presidents for Hawaii. So feel free to talk to me more after if you want to learn more about Stand With Crypto.
Thank you so much for those intros. I'd like to kick off the conversation with a question that would apply to all of you. It's our icebreaker question. What has been the most transformative regulatory, legal, or community milestone for blockchain based on your area of expertise?
Yeah, so I think for us, I was a regulator for so long that I think opening the sandbox for the state of Hawaii, like I said, it was the very first one. We had 20 companies in the first year, from startups to existing firms to firms who were, just starting out. So they were already established, but they weren't really engaged yet or too much with consumers. So what we were able to accomplish, through our partner state agency, which is where I met Alan, that I think that we were pretty successful in trying to figure out what consumers were using this for, what the guardrails should be around any regulation. And by the way, with those 20 companies, I was very surprised that they were wanting to have regulation. I mean, who would have guessed? And they were pretty instrumental in helping me draft a piece of legislation that actually went through the legislature in 2023, but was unfortunately vetoed by the governor. A new governor, not a priority for him at that time. But, we will try again. New day.
Well, I guess I would have to say, and this wouldn't probably be surprising to hear, that I think that the Genius Act is probably one of the landmark legislative pieces of the government here in the U.S. has ever enacted. And I know there's been a lot of talk about that and about stablecoins today, but I think that it resonates with everybody about how transformative this will become for the U.S. generally and for its leadership in the world of crypto and digital assets, and also to facilitate, and we can get into this, the various use cases that will fall from that.
There's a ton of legal and policy milestones, but I think from the community perspective, a milestone that I've seen is just like how people have been empowered by this tech, how communities feel more empowered and how they're mobilizing together. I've seen more people become more politically engaged because crypto takes such a big impact in their own life. So blockchain it's not just about the tech, it's become a movement. And I think that's a milestone that I've seen.
Great, thank you so much. So speaking of the Genius Act, that was certainly a significant milestone in crypto regulation. And just, I'm sure everyone here knows what stablecoins are probably, but I'll just, for a refresher, stablecoins are cryptocurrencies designed to maintain stable value relative to a specific asset, like the US dollar. So yes, the Genius Act represents a pivotal step in defining their future, for sure. Reba, perhaps you could start by laying the groundwork for the Genius Act, maybe clarifying the federal and intended bifurcation of federal and state.
Sure. So the Genius Act is intended to provide some guardrails around stablecoins, the issuance and management of stablecoins, and it's also intended to provide some clarification on what the registration requirements are and ongoing requirements, and dividing the federal governance with the state governance. So the federal governance is that stablecoin issuers have to have a license, like a banking license, or else secure a regulatory license from the OCC. And the stablecoin issuers who hold 50 billion or more in assets are subject to federal audit. There are a lot of rules around what their investments have to be. So it has to be in US dollars or in US-like equivalents, such as US treasuries. And then from a state and also, I say, a foreign perspective, the states can regulate those stablecoin issuers with assets up to $10 billion. And there is a provision for foreign issuers to also be able to offer stablecoins in the US, but they have to be subject, of course, to the same type of regime of being either a bank or an OCC-like regulated entity. And one of the interesting cases that has arisen here is that in the context of Tether, it was just announced this week that Tether is going to pursue stablecoin regulatory oversight in the US. And we can talk about that a little bit more, but that's actually a monumental decision. And part of that is also the announcement that Bo Hind, who was the person who worked with the White House Crypto Council, has now joined Tether and will be the US CEO. And so there's a lot to unpack on that. We can get to that later.
Sure. So the regulations haven't been promulgated yet for the Genius Act. Is there something in the interim that can be done?
Well, we were just talking about that today. The law will become effective January 2027 unless regulations are promulgated before that time. So what a lot of banks are doing is at least thinking about how they will offer products and services, or at least compete with stablecoin issuers. So they might have their own stablecoins, or they need to be prepared to face great competition in deposit holders who go to banks currently versus those who might instead start using stablecoins, such as for payments and the like. So I would say that's a key consideration.
Great. Iris, what are your thoughts on potential partnerships with banks in this evolving framework?
Yeah, so for Hawaii, as we were talking about with Reba earlier, they are pretty conservative, if you haven't guessed. And, because there are only 6 banks in Hawaii, the focus of all of the regulators are just like right on them. So any move they make, positive or negative, gets picked up. So they are probably less likely to do anything in particular. But I think with the Genius Act, I think there's room for the state to promulgate some consumer protection type laws. And, as we said earlier, trying to update the law that was vetoed earlier, and trying to convince the banks, maybe not so much to engage in this particular activity, unless they're comfortable at it, but to be aware, have a game plan in mind, so that they know how they're going to compete with the customers who might be exiting from their own bank. to somewhere else that's issuing the stable coins. So I think that, in the next year or so, I think it'll be pretty exciting to see how banks are going to maneuver through that, and other financial institutions, actually.
Yeah, interesting. Do you believe that the Genius Act strikes a good balance between consumer protection and enabling innovation?
Yeah, so I think so. I mean, I think that the one thing that the Genius Act kind of opened up is for institutions who have less than $10 billion, which is five of our banks in Hawaii. That opens up an opportunity for them to, kind of get started in this area. I think that they, with the consumer protection laws that we had in the previous bill, I think everybody's kind of used to what those guardrails were, and both the companies and the banks, and so everyone was a little bit comfortable with that. They kind of knew what was going to happen to them, what the investment they would have to make in order to make that happen. So I think that all will sort of heat up and hopefully become something that Hawaii can, be a leader in. I think it's going to take some advocacy, so I'm so glad that you're here, Tamara, that, help with that advocacy for, different companies to, speak out and kind of enunciate what is so good about the Genius Act, what is so good about this consumer protection.
Reba, same question for you. Do you think it strikes a balance?
Well, there's going to be a lot of innovation around it because of competition. So the banks currently pay some amount of interest to deposit holders, albeit it's very small. Under the law relating to stablecoins, issuers are not allowed to pay interest or yield. Part of that was because the community banks and other lobbyists around banking financial institutions did not want to have this stablecoins have the ability to pay interest. They were very concerned about the competition, and they're under a lot of stress currently anyway. So the banking industry is a really important component of the U.S. economy. And the banks, their business model is that they lend on the long term, but they borrow short term. So they need to be able to have the money supply to be able to continue to serve their communities. And providing loans to their communities and mortgages is a really key component to the way that they work and then how that affects our economy. So I would say that the innovation is going to be around how can they compete, what kind of products and services can they continue to provide to their deposit holders and to that base. And then for those who are unbanked, stablecoins still offer a really good, very compelling product to them because now they have alternatives to having otherwise to use wire transfers, which can cost a lot of money, $26, I think, on average for a wire transfer, versus using their debit card. There's a cost associated with that as well, albeit it's much smaller, but it's still a cost. I think it's 21 cents. And so a stablecoin is going to provide them with a much cheaper alternative to engage in the payment system and for remittances for those who are transacting on a cross-border basis.
Thank you for that. Tamara, you represent Stand With Crypto. It played a pivotal role in shaping crypto legislation. Can you share with us how Stand With Crypto and the broader community influenced Capitol Hill to help achieve the Genius Act?
So for Genius, we have Stand With Crypto advocates and also Seek chapter presidents. They mobilized their community, so they sent thousands of emails, calls. They went into in-person meetings in DC. They scheduled meetings in their own cities, in their own state to talk about crypto with their member of Congress. we had a state chapter president drive like hours to attend a town hall just to discuss crypto with him. So those are the things that I saw, our advocates doing for Genius. I think them doing all of these things has humanized crypto for Congress. They have a face to it. It's not just tech. And I think the conversation is moving from, it's just not lobbyists or big tech pushing this tech blockchain. It's actually their own constituents that care about blockchain.
Great, thank you. You did talk to us about what the Genius Act would mean for Hawaii. Do you want to expand on that?
Yeah, so I think, there have been some conversations, or I've had some conversations with some of our banks about what it is that they're going to do, how are they thinking about what the competition is going to look like, whether or not they're going to stick their toe in, and if they do, what is it that they're thinking might happen. But, as Reba said, it all comes down to money. They need to have a separate fund, I guess you would call it, to back up these stable coins. And really, when you think about banks, you think that they have a lot of money. They don't. A lot of it is already tied up. And so they don't have like this extra money to set aside to, hold one for one with the stable coins. So it should be really interesting. I'm not really sure what they're thinking. They have 18 months to try to figure it out. And, hopefully they'll have some idea about what the consumer protection is going to look like, what it is that they think that their customers are going to want, and really to stop the drain if there's an exodus from their bank. What is it that they're going to do? Because, we wouldn't want to have any closure of any of the banks because of a drain.
Yeah, thank you for that insight. Tamara, are you seeing any trickle-down effects with the states in terms of advocacy needs at the state level?
I think there was kind of like a tug-of-war between state and like federal law. There were like gaps between the two. So seeing like the shared baseline between the two, I think states can flourish and create better laws for their own cities. And then within that, community leaders can propose better innovation that's, for their own cities.
Right, yes. Okay, so moving on from stable coins, unless you want to talk more about USDT, could you share
sure.
what you were thinking?
Yes, sure, I'd be happy to. So Tether, as we all know, has been extremely successful on a global basis with offering their USDT. Their primary markets are in the Asian markets and in markets where there's high inflation. So there are 3 buckets of, let's say, varying regulations that apply across the board for this type of a product. So one bucket is what they call the high compliance bucket. And that would be in the US, where if an issuer of a stablecoin wants to do business here, they have to be subject to, heretofore, it would be like the money transmission licenses and perhaps a trust license if they're custodying assets. And then you have the federal overlay of the banking licenses. So Circle has complied with all of that and has the largest market here in the US. Then you have another bucket that's called like the gray bucket. Let's call it the gray market. That is where Tether thrives. And those are the markets where the regulatory frameworks aren't as strict as in the US. And so they can do business in these other places like I mentioned. And those are exchanges that operate in those other jurisdictions, as well as the OTC market, where you have traders who are trading and using Tether. So there are huge markets, like, for example, in Dubai and places like that, Hong Kong. And the Tether complies with the requirements in those markets. And then you have what you call the black markets or the dark markets where illicit financing flourishes. And so Tether is compliant with the laws. So if, for example, Tether sees that there's a bad actor using USTC to transact, they will close that account. They will not transact in it. And so they're not living in that market, or at least let's put it this way, when they see it, they close it down. So Tether, however, coming to the US is going to be a big leap for them because of a couple of reasons. One is that they currently do not have the fully backed US dollar or equivalent reserves. About $30 billion of their reserves are held in assets that currently would not comply with the Genius Act. And so for them to transition to the US means that they're giving up yield on those higher yielding instruments that they hold in their reserve account. And it's stated that they could potentially lose up to 20% of their earnings in having to convert everything to US treasuries, US dollars. So then the question is that worth the effort for them? Because the US market is already taken up by Circle and PayPal. So the question becomes, what is their end game there?
Wow, interesting. Okay, so moving from stable coins, another massive piece of legislation that is headed for the federal Senate floor is the Digital Asset Market Clarity Act. So I'll just ask you, what are your perspectives on this bill? And more broadly, how should regulators approach the task of classifying crypto assets? Would you like to start, Iris?
You know, after speaking with some of the congressional delegation, I'm not really sure whether or not those two other acts are going to be making their way through. I mean, I think that it was sort of unprecedented that the Genius Act made it through both sides of Congress in such a short period of time. And, you know, elections are coming up. I don't know how many of them are going to want to take a chance. You know, what if it fails? You know, I think that, you know, a lot of congressional folks are kind of conservative in that way just because they're just unsure of what's going to happen. They don't know enough to talk about it, you know, coherently. And if they can't do that, they don't want to take a chance. And so, you know, I kind of hope that the advocacy piece, you know, will really come through, you know, with short papers on what this is all about so they can at least say something intelligent to their constituents. And, you know, anything further detailed, you know, they can, you know, do their own research. But yeah, I think the advocacy piece is going to be really important if that is to sail through the Senate.
Thank you.
Yes,
Your thoughts?
Well, if I could just, I concur with Iris. I think it's a question right now about what the status of these bills is going to be, because currently the Senate Banking Committee is marking up their version. It passed in the House in July, but now you have the Senate Banking Committee with their own version they're marking up, plus 12 Democrats in the Senate came forth with their framework for what I would say, based on the Clarity Act, but some tweaks to that. That just happened this week. And another thing that just happened this week is that in response to the Senate Banking Committee asking for comments on the bill, the DeFi Education Fund came out with a comment. So that fund is funded by the DeFi community, Uniswap, Solana, A16Z is involved in that, Jitto Labs, Jump. There are a bunch of DeFi-focused firms that have come out now with this comment, and they're advocating for an approach in which DeFi is not going to be regulated like traditional financial instruments. They're advocating for technology to be considered neutral, and that somehow DeFi wouldn't fall into the classifications of a security or a commodity or the like. So I don't know to what extent that's going to be taken up with embracing that kind of approach in whatever legislation will finally, I guess, get voted on in the Senate. But it's not clear what the timeline is. Some people say that they think the bill will be done by the end of the year. I don't know, with Iris's comment about also elections, midterm elections coming up, that might also impact it.
Tamara, do you have any thoughts?
I think just from a community viewpoint, I think people just want like clear rules. From the advocacy thing that you mentioned, a lot of people don't have time to read. I don't know how many pages the bill is for clarity. It's like 50 plus, and it's like super dense. I try to read it and use ChatGPT, but it still wouldn't give me a good summary. But on standwithcrypto.org, we have a one-pager on clarity, and it gives you like the main bullet points. So if you do end up emailing your member of Congress and you set up a meeting with them, you could use this one-pager to ask them questions why they voted yes or no on Genius, and then try to see what their stand is on clarity, and then maybe mention how crypto impacts you and how you're utilizing it and how it's impacting your city and your state.
If I could just
Yeah,
jump in
please.
to say something in response to that tomorrow, that would be great if we could just ask our senators these questions, but they're not coming to town hall meetings, so I don't know how we can reach them.
And any of you can answer, just, go for it. Looking at the regulatory patchwork in the United States, what do you see as the biggest obstacles to harmonizing regulations between U.S. states and federal agencies?
So there's always a fight between the feds and the states. Always. You can just count on it. And I think that the interesting thing about the Genius Act is it kind of lays out what the feds are going to be, overseeing and what the states can oversee. And what the states can oversee is something similar to what the feds can oversee, which is always helpful. I think the biggest hurdle, though, is when states are trying to, I don't know if harmonize is the right word, but enact their different pieces of legislation. If they try to work together, it always comes to, well, I don't like what this state is doing. We have state sovereignty. I don't like what this state is doing. We also have state sovereignty. And so it's really difficult, I think, for states to try to harmonize all of their laws. We have tried over the years, when I was the bank commissioner, to harmonize other laws, and it's really sticky about, trying to satisfy everyone. So I think that, to the extent that consumer protection part is very similar between the states, I think that would be a win. And I think that there is less friction amongst the states about trying to enact consumer protection type provisions for consumers.
Thank you. I see we're getting low on time, so I'm going to skip ahead. Reba, in your work at Alphapoint, what are you seeing in terms of regulatory frameworks in other countries and their intersections and impact with the U.S. market?
Well, I had mentioned El Salvador earlier on, and El Salvador has a regulatory regime around Bitcoin and then separately digital assets. So we have a subsidiary that has a license as a Bitcoin service provider and then a digital assets service provider. One of the benefits of operating in El Salvador is that there's also a very favorable tax regime for these kinds of assets and for service providers of these assets. there are other regimes like that, like, for example, Bermuda, which has a pretty robust regulatory regime, but it also has great tax incentives. And so there are a lot of U.S. companies that like to set up their subsidiaries in jurisdictions like that. In MiCA, there's a lot been discussed about MiCA. The approach there is that it harmonized, and you were talking about that iris in the context of states. The European countries are harmonized now through the MiCA regulatory framework. So those are some of them. And then there's a lot of activity in other parts of the world.
I have more, well, I would have more questions, but the time is getting really low. So back to advocacy. How can grassroots advocacy genuinely influence fair, innovation-friendly regulation?
I think just humanizing crypto is what makes grassroots just fair, and like congressmen and policymakers have a face to it, and they know that their own constituents are utilizing it. So in the US, we have thousands of people that sent emails and calls and set up meetings to talk about crypto. Maybe it's just not about why they voted on it, maybe it's just about educating. So it starts like that. Yeah.
Are there successful examples you can share where grassroots advocacy led to meaningful policy change beyond what we've discussed here about the Genius Act?
I think we could see that with Genius. We had a lot of advocates from Stand With Crypto and also chapter presidents mobilize their community to be engaged and to create some kind of contact with their member of Congress.
So I think that's kind of an interesting question because, we had kind of a difficult time when we were trying to pass through our piece of legislation in the state. And it was difficult only because a lot of these firms, advocacy was not something that they even thought of or even knew what to do. And so we definitely had to handhold them all the way through, help them write a letter. They didn't know what to say. It's like, just say these 3 things and, say it in your own words. What legislators, at least in Hawaii, do not like is just the same, carbon copied letter, thousands of them. That will count as one. But, as these firms were writing their own words, I think that had a lot more meaning to the legislators. But advocacy is definitely something new for all these firms to do, and a lot of hand-holding, I think, has to happen.
Very exciting. All right, we only have a couple minutes left, so I guess let's just talk about the future. What do you look into your crystal ball and tell us what is exciting for you coming up in blockchain?
So I think for me, the most exciting thing is the innovation. I think it's going to start hopefully exploding soon. They have 18 months to try to figure it out. Hopefully before the 18 months, something positive will happen, and people who have very creative minds will be able to try to figure out what exactly they're going to do, really on the bank side, and to get ready for the competition.
Reba?
I would echo that. I think innovation is the most exciting area. There's a lot of work that needs to be done, but there are a lot of us who are willing to do it. All of the people in this room, and then multiply that across, a nation and then the world. So I think that, and I thought the panel right before us was very interesting in the context of innovation and what's happening with blockchain and AI. And that is where there is going to be a tremendous amount of growth and use cases that will be addressed with the convergence of AI and blockchain. And I see that the unbanked and those who don't have the full suite of banking services available to them are going to be the ones who could potentially benefit the most from this.
Great. Tamara?
I'm excited to see, I'm not sure if it'll happen, but a transition from skepticism, what we hear, to good impact. I want to see communities get empowered by blockchain, and having this white noise in the background that blockchain is, like scary or all these things. It's empowering communities and it's unlocking new ways that cities could use.
Thank you so much. This was an insightful discussion. Iris Ikeda, Reba Beeson, and Tamara Szulc, thank you so much for being here, and thank you to all of you for joining us. Aloha.